locals call it Tarkintown.
Named for Grand Moff Tarkin, Governor of the Outer Rim.
Hello and welcome back to Blue Milk Gaming. Today I'll be discussing Tarkintown and the Secrets of Power meta. Starting off, we'll go over why Tarkintown, the benefits of this 25 HP base, and why I think it's a good design. And then I'll go into the different styles to play Tarkintown. Not all Tarkintown decks are alike. They each have different ways to either enable it or play around the synergy. And then I'll go into my choices and list for my favorite picks. Starting off, why Tarkintown? Tarkintown is a 25 HP base that has epic action, 3 damage to a damaged unit. And the benefits here is not just make Ogdo Bogdo sad. It is the ability to develop your board turn 1 while also keeping your opponent off board, setting pace for the game, making them a turn behind while you're able to push damage or control board. Now I think this is one of the best designed bases in the game because it's really one of the few that enables new strategies. While we have seen the force bases, those were really just an entire set built around one mechanic, whereas Tarkintown, unlike either ECL or Datavolt, is not an auto-include necessarily, but has enabled a lot of different strategies and play lines that we have not seen from other bases in this game. Now starting off is my favorite category, and that is the Cunning Heroic Tempo decks. These are decks that are often very aggressive, however they have a lot of very controlling play lines. They try to find the balance between the two, of being an aggro deck against slower decks, but also being able to control and fight for board. Starting off as the first one is Quinlan List. While his power level has gone significantly down since the loss of Force Throw, the discard package is not as great without its payoff. This deck has leaned much more into an aggressive style deck, and I still think it's a solid choice. The downside is it does struggle without Force Throw into more controlling and slower mid-range decks, for example Yoda Datavolt, as well as Anakin Datavolt can be very tricky. But overall, it is still a powerful deck, and it's able to play a lot of just generically good value units because its ping is very flexible. It's just match curve with your opponent. Your opponent is going to be playing units outside of hard control, so you'll eventually get the ping off and be able to set up Tarkintown. Next up is one of the newer decks around. It's Padme Amidala. She has not seen too much success yet in Secret of Power. She has the ability to have some of the strongest turn 1 plays in the game. Similar to how Cad Tarkintown tries to go 2 1-drops and ping off your opponent's first turn play, Padme Amidala is able to do that, but instead of going down 2 cards from hand, you actually play it for 1 card and then draw a card, so going down effectively 0 cards, playing 2 units on board, and being able to ping your opponent's units at Tarkintown. And that is leaning for some very powerful play lines. It also has the ability to utilize Bail Organa, the Warrior Clan Ordo, as well as Marin to be able to take out, with a pump, any leader of the game, just about. Now the downside is, she's a very slow leader to start off. She flips 1 turn later than Quinlan, who's in the similar colors, and because you have to go for this discard strategies, Faith in Your Friends is often where you lean to, and you're forced to play on more heroic yellow cards than red, so you lose a lot of the powerful synergy pieces with the ping decks like Red 5, so on, and you're much more forced into a builder strategy. However, the payoff is very powerful. If you're able to get your unit strategies going, you can effectively lock your opponents off board for a good while. However, because all of its strategies rely off units, mainly on attack abilities, if your opponent's able to keep you off board, Padme struggles a lot more than Quinlan to fight back. It is a less common, but still popular archetype, and it's the Cunning Heroic Aggro style decks. You first saw this breakthrough with Lando Calrissian in the second set. Sadly, he has not gotten much support since then. However, Smuggler has brought a lot of very powerful cards. Arm to the Teeth, Hotshot Blaster, and Cassian. Being able to play these very cheap, at the downside of losing a resource, it's not always that detrimental if you're able to push enough damage. However, once the leader goes down and your opponent's able to 1-for-1 any of your units, this deck does struggle, does not have a lot of reach, is forced to play a lot of non-heroic cards, so does not get Foracaz or Rebel Package. It is often much slower in trying to have explosive power plays with Next up we have the Jump to Lightspeed leaders, starting off with Han 4. Now this deck is very interesting because it has one of the most explosive flip turns in the game, being able to play up to 10 resources on the 5 resource turn can be incredibly powerful. Now the downside here comes from the fact that you require a wide board, so if your opponent is able to control your units as you're playing often 1-drops and go wide strategies, you will struggle to maximize the value of the leader. And if that happens, you're just playing a very weak deck. However, I still think this is a powerful leader, plays a lot of the best cards, and can push down. In similar fashion, we have another Jump to Lightspeed leader, and that's Kazuda. His leader ability is to blank a friendly unit text, and while this may sound bad at first, you're able to negate some of these. For example, Fireball was built to work with Kazuda. Getting a 3/3 ambusher with no downsides can be very strong on turn 1 as you're able to clear their space often and develop your own board. But the real power comes from the fact of cards like Heroic Sacrifice and Trench Run. Because of the way his ability works, when you lose abilities, you cannot gain abilities either, and the defeat effects for both Trench Run and Heroic Sacrifice are reveal combat to oppose abilities. So if you blank a unit, play these powerful bombs, you're basically getting +4 or +2 and draw a card for 1 resource with no downsides. And that can be incredibly explosive and incredibly powerful. The downside with Kazuda is that it can be very fragile because the deck revolves around powerful pumps like Trench Run and Heroic Sacrifice. If your opponent is able to keep your board low, you are not able to flip onto anything or get value out of these pumps, and you're just playing a slow, fair aggro deck. Next up is the newest leader around, and that's Sabine Tarkintown. This deck has seen a lot of success recently the past few weeks, and is showing to possibly be one of the best yellow aggro Tarkintown decks. Now, Sabine has a very interesting ability, being able to discard one of the top 2 cards of your opponent's decks when you deal damage to a base can be very powerful. The downside here comes from the fact that there's often less cards that you want to discard than you don't want to discard, especially because decks run a lot of early plays, turn 1 and turn 2 plays as the game goes late, are not things you care about. It's mainly their explosive and powerful board wipes, for example, Barrage, stabilization units like Reinforcement Walker and Luke's, Wreckers, are the cards that you're looking to discard, as well as Space Answers. And so if you're not hitting one of those, as the odds to hit those are lower than to find other units, you often find yourself digging your opponent closer to those cards. However, the power from Sabine comes from her unit side, where she's able to look at the hand, discard a card from your opponent's hand. While I do get to draw a card off this effect, you are able to pick off anything that got through Sabe's original ability, for example, cards in their starting hand or cards that you are not able to discard, meaning that you're still able to filter out some of their strongest plays before they're able to wipe your board. Now, the downside here comes from the fact that this is a very difficult ability to quantify its value. If you're not discarding good cards, you don't have any unfair or powerful plays, unlike the other leaders on this list, so you play a much more fair aggro deck. And so it'll be interesting to see if this is the strategy because it's a little more consistent. It doesn't have much plays to disrupt, it's just an aggro deck swing base. It does not have to build around fighters, smuggle, or Han's flip turn, so it's a much more simple strategy. Now we have the original Tarkintown deck, and that is Cad Bane. Interesting enough, as the game has gone on, Cad has gone from the more typical mid-range style, playing 2-drops and top end like Cad Bane, to a much more aggressive style deck that's trying to go 2 1-drops on a first turn play. Now their strategy here is to play a 1-drop. If you pass, they take the initiative and have 1 unit on board and Tarkintown up. If you play a unit on the board, they play their second 1-drop, Tarkintown that, and suddenly they're trading 5 HP on their base for 2 units on board, which can put up to 6 power while you have none. And this can lead to some very aggressive play lines and makes it very difficult for unit-based strategies to stabilize against him, as there's not a lot of ways to play around this, typically. Now, the downside for the one-drop strategy is that it has very poor top-deck potential. It often dumps its hand because it's a lot of tiny units, and since you run a lot of tiny units, you don't have a lot of good top-end finishers, so as the game goes later, you can often find yourself with not a lot of powerful or strong plays, and no hands to finish out or close out the game, as there's no reach outside of Ruthless Raider and Devastator. However, Plot this set has made this a lot better. Having more things to play from your resource row without using your hand has given the deck the ability to put more value while dumping its hand. Now, the mid-range version also got some very powerful cards this set, especially Garindin. The ability to Clunky and Bazine absolutely rip your opponent's hand non-stop can be very powerful playlines. This is a much slower and controlling strategy, so this deck is looking to grind out a little bit more, keeping you off while also pushing damage to base. Now, this type of strategy can be good, however, because of the insane mid-range decks that we have right now, especially the Green Heroic decks. It's hard to outvalue them as their whole strategy is I get more value than you. And because this is a slower deck, once these Yodas, Lukes, and Home Ones come out, it's very hard to push through the infinite restore that these decks can get. However, unlike the one-drop, this deck can be much more controlling, it can fight the board a lot stronger, it has better units all throughout the curve. Finally is the lesser known, but still kind of classic, and that is the mono aggression decks. Starting off with Kylo Tarkintown, this deck is one of the fastest decks in the format, as it's able to discard a card from your hand to give a unit +2. The downside here is, unlike typical pumps, you don't get to attack with that unit, which means that this aggro style is very susceptible to any decks that have interaction with your board. If they're able to defeat your units and negates the value you get, it can be very difficult for Kylo to push damage, as he's going essentially all of his eggs in one basket a lot of the time, and it's going to lead for some very blowout and punishing play lines. It's a very greedy and aggressive deck, however, it can push up to 9 to 10 damage on turn 2, and even more if you have upgrades. Next up we have Dead Romero, and that is one of the best Tarkintown decks here in Mono Aggression because the leader ability is able to either draw a card or ping units. It means you have the best way and consistent way to enable your Tarkintown value. And if you draw a card, you're enabling Dedra's Raid too, making you 4/5. And you're also playing into your best card in the deck, and it's Aggressive Negotiation, which is a pump that gives you +1 for every card in it. Dedra is very much built around this draw card value, Tarkintown, Aggressive Negotiation style. You can have very swingy games because you're pushing almost 10 damage with a single pump out of nowhere. It is very hard for your opponent to stop all units at once when any one of them can close out the game. However, similar fashion to Kylo, they're able to control your board. You don't have a lot of reach outside of something like Chaos of War and Ruthless Raider, so you have to be careful with pushing damage. Now, Sabine Wren is one that I prefer the most, and that is because the leader ability gives you something that these other two don't, and that is guaranteed damage to base every turn. Now, this allows you to push early damage, but also means that as the game goes on, they're adding this inevitability of if they don't have restore, you are just eventually going to kill them if they don't kill you first. And since you are the faster deck, you don't mind this style of play. You do get similar cards, like Kylo Ren. You can still have go wide 1-drops, as you said, gave a lot more rebels. You can dump your hand because Sudden Ferocity. Cassian can insulate and give you later plays from the resource row. And because of all the new cards, the Rebel synergy is actually much higher than it was last set. You have a lot of turn 1 Rebels, and you also have a lot of reach built in to your deck. Now, starting off for the Heroic Tempo decks, my pick is always going to be Quinlan List. He's a leader I have a lot of experience with, and while I think this meta may not necessarily be the best for him with Yoda Dateable being the second most popular deck, he's still very strong to a lot of the field outside of top decks. He's also very strong into some of the top decks in the format. Tarkintown gives you a lot of value onto, and because you're an aggressive deck, you are able to effectively race them a lot of the time. However, losing Force Throw was a major blow to this deck. This deck can't grind out against a lot of these controller and mid-range strategies as much as it used to, but because of things like Kazuda, Charismatic, Sunfrosty, you do have a lot of more aggression early on. Like instead of better than Mandala, even though she has higher highs, you to controlling the board because of her unique ability. Yeah, this pick may be a hot take, as I know Sabe Tarkintown has been the most successful deck the past 2 weekends. In my mind, I just want to make you consider that this is running a lot of the same cards, however, it has much more explosive plays. Bamboozle is no longer in the meta, and there's a lot less ways to deal with on flipping on 5 resources if you're able to get a board. This may not end up being better than Sabe just because Sabe is a very consistent and does its thing type leader, but I do think the blowout potential, despite potential on 4, is worth at least considering your testing if you're looking. Now, my pick for Cad has always been the 1-drop version. I played this like a lot leading into the previous season. I took it to Seattle for the 3v3, and I think this is a very strong version of Cad. I know my list is a little bit different, but also inspired by Yoda Killer, so feel free to check him out. I'm sure by the time this video goes live, I wouldn't be surprised if he has his own video covering the deck, so check him out. But here's my list. One ad inspired off Yoda Killer's recent run was the AT Haulers, but as you see, a lot of turn 1 plays, as well as McClunky and Forlom Zuckus, and you're able to just push a lot of damage early on, make the early game much more awkward for you while you're able to push damage uncontested, saving your Tarkintown a lot of the times for either Sentinels or much more units. Now there's a lot of downsides here. You just have to be careful with your hand size, your resources are very important. And you can run out of cards and lines very easy. Now my pick for the mono aggression decks is Sabine Wren. Now I saw Osmium Blaze take this to a 1k early on in JTL, got 2nd place, and later on won a PQ the following sets. And this is a very powerful and interesting deck. Secrets of Power gave it a lot in terms of another 1-drop rebel plays, rebel packages more online, another 3 for 2, as well as Charismatic and Sunfrosty when you're dumping your hand. Now this deck is very difficult for the Han 2s to race because you're able to push out Mr. Bones plus spent the 2 tubes is 7 damage, swinging going to 2 resource, or going to 3 resource turn, as well as Sabine's ping. So it's very difficult for them to stop you. Now the downsides is it's not as explosive as some of the other mono aggression Tarkintown decks. It's playing a much more fair strategy. However, it has a lot more reach as it has K2SO and Sabine's ping to close out the game. Well, I covered a lot of the more common and traditional Tarkintown decks. There's a lot of leaders and strategies that can still be paired with it, so let me know down below in the comment section what your favorite Tarkintown pairings are. As well, deck list for all the leaders I covered will be in the description of the video, along with links to our Discord if you'd like to talk SWU with us, and our Patreon if you'd like to support the content.